Beneath the neat lines of history's official record lies a tangle of shadows, sealed vaults, erased names, and operations spoken of only in rooms without windows. These are fragments smuggled past censors, glimpses of a world where survival meant swallowing truths too dangerous to keep alive. If you listen closely, you can still hear them. Footsteps in empty corridors, orders whispered over bad lines, and the echo of secrets the war refused to bury. The surviving paper trail on the disappearance of Kriegsmarine submarine U-877B is as thin as it is unsettling. Officially, the boat never existed, its hull number erased from war diaries, its crew list missing from Bundesarchiv rolls, its voyages absent from Allied naval logs. Yet fragments remain, scattered like ash among the declassified and the stolen. According to intercepted Kriegsmarine teleprints, U-877B departed Kiel at 4:20 hours on March 17, 1945, under the orders of Fregattenkapitän Otto Müller. The operation bore the code name Adlersturm, a designation not found in any surviving Kriegsmarine planning documents. Its destination, Nord-Eisfeld, believed by analysts to be an encrypted reference to the Kara Sea. Accompanying the orders was a single instruction in red pencil. Frakt unversert, unter allen Umständen, cargo intact, under all circumstances. The manifest for the voyage is missing from the surviving logs of the 11th U-boat flotilla. However, a British Special Intelligence Service memorandum dated March 22, 1945, recovered from the Public Record Office, in Kew, refers to intercepted Morse from 877B, indicating embarkation of Package Weiss from Peenemünde Sud. Peenemünde was by then under heavy Allied bombing, and Package Weiss was apparently retrieved from a research annex adjacent to Test Stand 7, the V-2 rocket launch site. 3 days into the mission, a Royal Navy corvette, HMS Amethyst Bay, patrolling the Norwegian Sea, logged an unidentified sonar contact matching the displacement and signature of a Type IXD-2 U-boat. The contact shadowed the corvette's course for nearly 14 hours, then abruptly broke away to the northeast, toward the ice margins. No depth charges were dropped. The captain's after-action report was later sealed under the Admiralty's most secret classification. What happened next is buried in contradictions. Soviet Navy archival notes, declassified in 1998 but never formally acknowledged by Moscow, contain a terse reference to engagement with hostile submersible, bearing German markings, March 31, 1945, coordinates within Kara Sea sector. The entry ends with the cryptic phrase, Ziel verschwand unter dem Eis, target disappeared beneath the ice. No wreck was reported. No prisoners taken. Post-war Allied intelligence pursued the matter sporadically. In 1946, the OSS circulated a restricted memo titled Potential Recovery of German Arctic Cargo to select U.S. Navy officers. It noted a correlation between the 877B disappearance and later Soviet expeditions to Novaya Zemlya, where, from 1947 onward, the USSR conducted classified geological surveys. Some researchers believe these surveys were cover for recovery missions. By 1947, any official investigation had dissolved. Requests for access to 877B case files were met with uniform replies. Records destroyed per Directive 13B, August 1947. Yet survivors from the 11th U-boat flotilla, interviewed decades later, spoke in hushed tones about Müller's final departure. One machinist claimed the captain had ordered reinforced refrigeration units installed in the forward torpedo room, not for provisions, but for something that had to be kept colder than ice. The few recovered artifacts linked to the boat are equally perplexing. In 1978, a Soviet trawler operating near Franz Josef Land snagged a corroded steel container in its nets. The cylinder bore Kriegsmarine property stamps and a faded stencil, WP/45. Soviet authorities confiscated it within 24 hours. The crew was ordered not to discuss the find. The container's contents remain unknown. There are hints that the United States obtained something connected to the disappearance. A FOIA release from the U.S. National Archives in 2013 revealed a Navy cryptography file with a single unclassified line, Ice Station Echo reports retrieval from U-877 Bravo sector, transfer complete, May 2, 1949. The document contains no further details, but the date suggests a recovery mission long after the war's end. Naval historians speculate about the nature of Package Weiss. Some propose it was advanced weapons technology, possibly an experimental warhead or guidance system. Others suggest biological material, noting Peenemann's proximity to facilities engaged in aviation medicine and high-altitude survival research. The most extreme theories involve nuclear prototypes, though no surviving evidence supports direct German weaponization of fissile material in that theater. Whatever it was, its trail ends where the Arctic begins. No official wreck location for U-877B has been released, and Soviet naval hydrographic surveys of the Kara Sea in the 1950s conspicuously omit the relevant coordinates. Even modern sonar expeditions, constrained by shifting ice and political jurisdiction, have failed to locate the remains. In recent years, a handful of amateur researchers have sought to reconstruct the submarine's path using Allied convoy records, wartime meteorological data, and decoded Enigma traffic. Their consensus is unsettling. U-877B's course appears designed to intersect a point far from any naval engagement zone, supply line, or plausible rendezvous site. It was heading, deliberately, into emptiness. As of today, the official stance of the German Navy Historical Service is that U-877B never existed. Yet scattered across British, American, and Russian archives, the faint residue of its journey remains. Unconnected files, unexplained cables, sonar contacts in the wrong seas. And somewhere under the shifting white silence of the Arctic, the boat that carried Package Weiss may still be sealed in black ice, its last orders unreadable, its true cargo unrevealed. The first known reference to Project Mercury Ash appears not in a military report, but in a 1946 entry from a Foreign Office restricted courier manifest. The entry reads simply, "Arrival, 6 technical specialists, source, Magdeburg sector, destination, UK secure facility, hand carry." No names, no serial numbers. The origin point, Magdeburg, was then deep inside the Soviet occupation zone, making the operation a near impossible feat of post-war extraction. According to fragmentary Mi-6 debriefing notes recovered from the National Archives in 1999, the extraction took place in the early hours of April 18, 1946. A joint British SIS and Special Air Service unit, operating under the temporary cover designation Military Mission 47A, crossed into the Soviet sector from Helmstedt. The 6 men they recovered were described as non-combatant engineering staff, ages 38 to 61, possessing skills in cryogenic metallurgy. The notes make a point to state they were not of rocket corps origin, an unusual clarification given the ongoing paperclip-style hunts for German rocketeers. The Soviet side made no public complaint. However, intercepted NKVD traffic from April 1946, decrypted in part under Britain's Venona program, records an unauthorized seizure of personnel linked to Frostblau near Magdeburg. The codename Frostblau appears nowhere else in surviving German wartime research lists, but a post-war chemical engineering journal from Dresden references cryogenic tempering techniques trialed at Frostblau, 1944-45. This matches the narrow expertise described in the Mi-6 notes. Transport from the border was conducted in 2 parts, first by RAF Dakota from Celle to RAF Nordholt, then by unmarked lorry convoy to a facility identified in paperwork only as X4. A declassified Ministry of Supply map from the period places X4 within the vicinity of Farnborough, Hampshire, at that time home to several classified Royal Aircraft Establishment hangars. Here the record turns murky. Internal Foreign Office memos from 1952 mention the Mercury Ash file being withdrawn from the Special Registry per directive of Cabinet Office Liaison, after which the project vanishes entirely from British archives. No official record of the 6 men's subsequent movements exists in immigration or census data, and their names, if ever recorded, remain unknown. One partial account comes from the testimony of squadron leader Gerald Miles, who in 1983 told a BBC researcher that in mid-1946 he'd been ordered to deliver technical parcels to a cold storage laboratory at Farnborough. He described the equipment as finned cylinders about the size of oxygen bottles, frost forming on the metal in mid-summer. He remembered seeing a single German-speaking man in the lab, with a white streak through his hair like he'd aged 20 years too soon. 2 days after their arrival, one of the 6 men, identified only in the MI6 notes as Subject 4, was found dead in his locked suite at the Langham Hotel, London. The cause was listed as cerebral hemorrhage. No inquest was held. The body was removed before hotel staff were allowed to re-enter the room. An undated Home Office pathologist's memo later found in a private collection describes subcutaneous frostbite along the fingertips of an unidentified foreign male matching the subject's age range. From that point onward, Project Mercury Ash seems to have been folded into deeper, compartmentalized research streams. In 1947, Farnborough requisition orders include a sudden spike in liquid nitrogen deliveries. Budget notes from the Air Ministry's research department cite unplanned capital expenditure for temperature isolation cells, with no linked project name. In 1949, a parliamentary defense subcommittee discussing post-war technology acquisitions made oblique reference to German expertise applied to reconnaissance materials survivable at altitudes exceeding 70,000 feet. No mention was made of how that expertise was obtained. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, appears to have continued its own pursuit of whatever Frostblau had been. A 1950 GRU technical report, acquired by the CIA and declassified in 2006, describes persistent intelligence gaps regarding Western exploitation of German cryogenic processes. The report speculates that such processes could be applied to long-duration aerial drones or to the preservation of biological material in extreme environments. It lists Magdeburg extractions as a key counterintelligence failure. As for the surviving 5 specialists, there is nothing. No death certificates, no pension records, no academic publications. Inquiries into wartime German metallurgical societies show that several experts in cryogenic alloying simply vanish from their membership rolls after 1945. One German researcher, Dieter Kalf, privately told a colleague in 1961 that his former mentor had been taken by the English and swallowed by the cold. Kalf himself died in an unexplained laboratory fire the following year. Today, Project Mercury Ash exists only as a series of disconnected shards, a courier manifest without names, an MI6 note about 6 silent engineers, a frostbitten corpse in a locked London hotel room. The broader implications remain speculative, yet the convergence of cryogenic metallurgy, post-war aerial reconnaissance ambitions, and missing personnel suggests a narrow and dangerous focus. Somewhere between Magdeburg and Farnborough, 6 men carried the sum of a German wartime program across occupied borders, only for their identities and work to be buried deeper than the ice they studied. The Soviet army entered Königsberg in April 1945 after months of siege, its historic castle reduced to a shell by artillery and bombing. In 1947, reconstruction surveys ordered by the Ministry of Culture led engineers beneath the remaining foundations, where they discovered an anomaly, a welded steel chamber embedded in the medieval masonry. Access required torch cutting through 2 inches of reinforced plate, revealing rows of metal canisters sealed in nitrogen. The labeling was sparse, handwritten coordinates, dates, and a single recurring word, Feuerkranz. The chamber and its contents were transferred to a secure depot in Kaliningrad under NKVD guard. An inventory list, recovered decades later from a retired officer's papers, records 117 units, photographic film, color, 16 mm, classified to the highest degree. Within weeks, the reels were flown to Moscow aboard a military transport. There they vanished into the archives of the KGB's predecessor, the MGB. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a partial copy of an internal MGB technical assessment surfaced among the effects of a deceased archivist. The document, dated August 14, 1947, described the footage as aerial reconnaissance of uninhabited zones, conducted at unknown altitudes, utilizing color film stock of non-Soviet manufacture. The coordinates listed in the reel titles did not match any known civilian maps. Several fell within areas later used by the USSR for nuclear testing, including remote tundra stretches in Novaya Zemlya. The aerial imagery itself has never been released, but second-hand accounts from those who claim to have seen it describe wide, circular scorch patterns on barren ground, precise and symmetrical, each ring larger than the last. Some sequences reportedly showed detonations from directly overhead, with shockwaves flattening terrain in expanding arcs. One Soviet film analyst, cited anonymously in a 1993 German television documentary, said the tests appeared to simulate concentric thermal events rather than conventional munitions impacts. Declassified U.S. State Department cables from 1949 provide a curious parallel. A diplomatic pouch sent from the American Embassy in Moscow to Washington contained technical motion picture film originating from Kaliningrad. No further description was given, but the pouch was delivered under special escort to the Pentagon. An accompanying memo from the Office of Naval Intelligence recommended cross-referencing footage against captured Luftwaffe experimental bombing studies. The memo was signed by Commander H. L. Berryman, a former OSS liaison who had overseen the interrogation of German aeronautic specialists. The German origin of Feuerkranz remains speculative. Surviving Luftwaffe documents make no mention of the codename, but an intercepted 1944 Enigma message, decoded by Bletchley Park's HUT-3, describes final stage trials of layered ignition patterns scheduled at an unnamed northern location. The message was filed under low priority and not pursued further at the time, possibly because the coordinates were unrecognizable. One plausible link comes from Peenemünde Forschungsstelle West, where aerial weapons analysts experimented with dispersed incendiary configurations intended to overwhelm enemy firefighting capacity. A surviving technical officer's notebook, now held in a private collection, includes a sketch of concentric burn zones marked FK. The owner, a former Bundeswehr engineer, claims it was recovered from a sealed desk drawer in Hamburg in 1945. Why such footage would be hidden beneath Königsberg Castle is unclear. The site had served as a regional command and storage hub during the war, but the use of nitrogen-sealed containers suggests long-term preservation far beyond standard military archiving. The concealment deep within the medieval structure implies deliberate protection from both aerial bombing and post-war looting. The coordinates tied to Feuerkranz have drawn particular attention from modern researchers. One set corresponds to a barren plateau in the Yamal Peninsula, an area off-limits to civilians for decades. Another lies near Cape Zelenia in Novaya Zemlya, later the site of Soviet thermonuclear trials. Yet in 1944, these regions were inaccessible to Germany except by long-range reconnaissance aircraft or submarines, meaning the Luftwaffe or Kriegsmarine would have required extraordinary reach to film them. In 2002, a joint Russian-German historical survey attempted to revisit the Yamal coordinates. Satellite imagery showed faint circular discolorations in the tundra, too large to be vehicle tracks and too regular to be natural. On-the-ground inspection was halted by local authorities citing environmental hazards and soil instability. Independent testing of moss and lichen samples from the periphery suggested elevated levels of metallic residues uncommon in the region. Official Russian archival indexes list no item by the name Feuerkranz. Yet the scattered pieces, Soviet engineers in a ruined castle, German coordinates with no map equivalents, U.S. diplomatic pouches arriving without explanation, point toward a buried narrative that the footage documented a form of precision aerial destruction unknown to Allied or Soviet arsenals at the war's end. Whether it was a weapons rehearsal, a demonstration for potential allies, or simply evidence of a test site now lost beneath ice and secrecy, Feuerkranz remains locked away, its reels unseen by public eyes, its concentric rings fading only in the tundra. In early May 1945, as German forces collapsed across Europe, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division intercepted a small convoy near Salzburg, Austria. The vehicles, 2 Opel Blitz trucks and a staff car, were marked with Luftwaffe insignia but carried no uniformed airmen. Instead, the escort wore mixed Wehrmacht and civilian clothing. The convoy was identified by captured orders as Hechtgruppe, a name absent from any known German operational rosters. According to the after-action report of Captain Thomas W. Leclerc, filed on May 10, 1945 and later redacted, the seizure occurred along the B305 road west of Salzburg. The trucks carried a mixture of personal effects, military correspondence, and a series of wooden crates stenciled with red concentric circles and Czech language notations. The writing was later translated by Army intelligence as survey sector, followed by alphanumeric codes. One crate contained only heavily annotated topographic maps, printed by the Reichsamt für Landesaufnahme, German Federal Survey Office, showing mountainous areas along the Czech-Austrian border overlaid with strange concentric red zones. Within hours, the crates were removed from divisional custody by a detachment of American officers in unmarked uniforms. Witnesses from the 3rd Infantry recall that these men carried no unit insignia and presented paperwork from the War Department Technical Section, a designation unfamiliar to the soldiers present. The maps were loaded onto a C-47 Dakota at Salzburg's airfield and flown to Fort Hunt, Virginia, the site of P.O. Box 1142, a classified interrogation and research facility. The sole surviving document listing their contents is a badly damaged inventory slip recovered in 1974 from an abandoned filing cabinet at Fort Belvoir. The slip's typed text reads, V-13 Site Alpha/Materials, Cartographic. The designation V-13 is not associated with any known German weapon. Technical officers have speculated that the maps may have corresponded to experimental weapons testing sites, possibly for high-yield explosives or subterranean detonations. Reports from Austrian civilians living near the red-zoned map areas recall distant concussive sounds in the late spring of 1945, long after regular artillery fire in the region had ceased. One shepherd from the village of Waitrau described 3 blasts in a row, deep like thunder inside the ground. Such testimonies were dismissed at the time as confusion caused by retreating forces demolishing bridges or munitions. A faint lead on V-13 emerged in 1951 when the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Office circulated a restricted briefing titled, Possible Predecessors to Soviet Subsurface Test Events. The briefing compared seismic readings from unexplained tremors in the Bohemian Massif to archived Austrian geological anomalies from 1945. The latter were matched to coordinates marked on the seized maps. The conclusion section, still partially classified, notes, source material derived from Hechtgruppe seizure, Salzburg AO. Attempts to locate any remaining Hechtgruppe personnel have been unsuccessful. German surrender rolls contain no unit or command by that name. One hypothesis is that Hechtgruppe was an ad hoc courier detail tasked with moving sensitive materials during the final days of the war, possibly away from advancing Soviet forces. If so, the Czech notations suggest the origin of the maps lay east of Austria, potentially within territory the Red Army occupied by May 1945. Unpublished diaries from an Austrian resistance liaison, found in a private estate sale in 1995, contain a cryptic entry dated May 3, 1945. Tonight we watched the German trucks again. They said they are moving the fish to America. Not fish, something underground, something big. The reference to fish has been interpreted as a play on Hecht, German for pike, aligning with the convoy's code name. Modern surveys of the suspected V-13 coordinates yield little. Satellite imagery shows no visible remains of large-scale installations, though in several locations vegetation patterns suggest past soil disturbance in circular patterns. The geology of the region includes extensive limestone caverns, which could have concealed experimental devices or served as test chambers. Any surviving evidence may have been destroyed or sealed in the chaotic last days of the war. The fate of the seized crates is unknown. Requests under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act for documents relating to V-13 or Hechtgruppe are met with standard responses that no records matching those terms exist. Given the known practices at P.O. Box 1142, it is possible the materials were studied, catalogued, and then either destroyed or integrated into classified post-war programs. The Hechtgruppe seizure sits at the intersection of disappearing wartime archives, missing cartographic data, and unexplained seismic anomalies. Whether the concentric red zones marked areas of natural interest, weapon testing, or something more esoteric, the fact remains. In the final days of the Third Reich, a convoy left with maps to sites that would not officially exist in any public record, only to vanish into the opaque machinery of another nation's intelligence system. In June 1953, a United States Air Force RB-36 reconnaissance bomber on a polar route surveillance mission captured a series of high-resolution oblique photographs of the eastern Kamchatka Peninsula. The images, analyzed at Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska, revealed a facility that did not appear on any Soviet civil or military registry. The complex consisted of several large radar-like installations, storage sheds, and a network of buried cables extending inland. The equipment bore a striking resemblance to the German Würzburg-Rees radar system, dismantled from Western Europe in 1944–45. The intelligence packet, labeled Operation Dead Beacon, was forwarded to the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Analysts there noted that the tower designs were identical to late-war Luftwaffe field schematics, down to the bolt pattern of the azimuth mounts. Declassified marginalia from the report mention strong possibility of site construction by imported German technical cadre, referring to the known post-war Soviet practice of relocating captured Axis specialists to remote research and military projects. A subsequent NSA intercept from late 1953 recorded KGB internal communications referencing Sector K-42, preservation of assets, German team members now Soviet nationals. The names in the message were redacted in later releases, but the phrasing matched other cases where former SS or Luftwaffe-affiliated engineers had been granted Soviet citizenship in exchange for work on high-priority defense programs. By mid-1954, further RB-36 passes confirmed that the Kamchatka site was active, with visible changes in equipment placement and the addition of 2 new towers. These modifications coincided with reports from U.S. Navy patrol vessels of unusual long-range radar interference originating from the Far East. A 1955 ONI technical bulletin concluded that the installation's purpose was likely early warning detection for missile or bomber approaches across the Pacific, though the report's final pages, still classified, contain handwritten notes suggesting possible experimental tracking of orbital objects. Then, in late 1955, the site was abruptly abandoned. Aerial photographs taken in February 1956 showed dismantled towers lying in snowdrifts, storage buildings with open doors, and no visible personnel. Buried cable trenches were filled in, and by the summer thaw, receded vegetation concealed most traces of infrastructure. The NSA intercept stream from that year contains a single relevant entry, Sector K-42 deactivated per Directive 8/14. All foreign specialists relocated. The directive itself remains unreleased. Soviet-era fishing logs from the nearby coast record an unusual influx of military vessels in early 1956, suggesting that whatever equipment or materials had been in use at the site was removed by sea. One former sailor interviewed in 1992 claimed the convoy included a heavy-lift barge carrying covered cylinders the size of small houses, loaded under floodlights before being secured with canvas and steel bracing. The most enduring question about Operation Dead Beacon is why the Soviets would dismantle a functioning early warning installation during the height of Cold War tensions. Declassified CIA internal memos from 1961, comparing radar coverage gaps in the Far East, note that the Kamchatka facility's removal coincided with the construction of a new installation in Kazakhstan, suggesting a shift in strategic priorities. However, an unredacted sentence in one memo hints at a more troubling cause: Kamchatka site deactivation preceded by anomalous electromagnetic readings exceeding safe operational thresholds. By the time U.S. reconnaissance aircraft revisited the location in 1961, nothing remained but faint soil scars where the towers had stood. The reseeding was thorough enough that even seasonal color variations in vegetation masked the outlines. Attempts in the 1990s by Russian amateur historians to locate remnants of the complex ended in unexplained denials of travel permits to the relevant coastal zones. No surviving Soviet documentation names the project, but the convergence of German wartime radar designs, post-war relocation of technical personnel, and unexplained abandonment has fueled decades of speculation. Some researchers believe the site's true purpose may have been to field test adapted Würzburg-Rees systems for tracking high-altitude or exoatmospheric objects, work that, if successful, would have been highly sensitive during the early space age. Others suspect a connection to classified Soviet missile defense trials, the results of which may have been too unstable or hazardous to continue. Today, Operation Dead Beacon survives only in fragments: U.S. reconnaissance photographs, a handful of intercept transcripts, and the memories of those who briefly saw alien towers rising from the frozen Kamchatka shore. The site's disappearance into the landscape mirrors its erasure from official records, leaving only the question of why it was built, and why it had to vanish so completely. The files are shredded, the witnesses gone, Yet something lingers in the static between fact and silence. It waits in forgotten coordinates, in maps no longer printed, in scars on landscapes no one admits exist. You may call it history, but to those who touched it, it was a debt unpaid, a warning ignored, and a truth locked so deep it learned to hide in plain sight.